Good afternoon, and welcome to the monthly Conexxus webinar series. Today we're talking about firewalls, LANs and WANs, the basics and the benefits and the security. And we're very pleased to have with us a very seasoned subject matter expert in the field, Simon Gamble, who is the President and CEO of Mako Networks. Our agenda today, I'll go over a few housekeeping items. I'll talk a little bit more about Simon's background and about Conexxus. We'll go through the presentation, and then we'll have questions and answers at the end. Just wanted to remind everybody that the webinar is being recorded and will be made available in approximately 15 days. You can find it on YouTube under the subscription of Conexxus Online, or you can go to Connexxus.org. And there is a resources tab, and you will find the webinar information there. The slide deck would be available to all attendees. After the Conexxus webinar concludes, you'll receive an email with a survey. It's only a few questions. So if you complete the survey, you will have a link provided to the presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. And we ask that you ask questions using the webinar interface. In the panel, there's a little questions section, so please ask your questions there. And then we do please ask that you refrain from asking specific questions. If you do have any questions or comments, please email them to info@connexxus.org. Today, our Conexxus host is Allie Russell. So Allie, thanks for getting us going today and getting everything set up. I'm your moderator. I'm Cara Gunderson. I'm the chair of the Conexxus Data Security Standards Committee. By day, I'm the point of sale manager at Citgo Petroleum. And today, we're very excited to have Simon Gamble, and he is Mako Networks president and co-founder. Simon has been involved in all of Mako's major petroleum and convenience store business. Simon's background is in networking, network security, and systems administration. Mako Networks was founded in New Zealand in 2000 and operates internationally. And you'll notice that Simon is from New Zealand because of his great accent. And Mako has been operating in the United States since 2012 and has been headquartered here since 2015. A little bit about Conexxus. Conexxus is an independent, nonprofit member technology organization. Essentially, they are the technology arm in conjunction. They work closely with NACS. Conexxus standards for data exchange, security, mobile commerce. They also provide vision and help identify trends. They're an advocate for our industry, and it really having this technology, having all of these standards helps all of us. Ecosystem. It's a long time to get to market, and so Conexxus also has a monthly webinar schedule. Today, again, we're very excited to have Simon with us, and so Simon, thank you. And in June, we will have a W3C update by David Azal from Conexxus and Ian Jacobs from W3C. It'll be with Linda Toth. We've also just added Paige Anderson from NACS and Caleb Burke, which is one of my peers here at Citgo. And then in August, we're going to have a Don't Get Phished and Get Trained by Security Innovation. September, we're going to have the updated data science presentation by the fine folks at Omega. And in October, Easy PCI. And if you want to learn how to make that a little bit easier, join the Hughes group for that. In November, Brian Russell from Verifone and Linda Toth again from Conexxus will be talking about outdoor EMV. And then Coalfire will be sharing their great words of wisdom with us in December. And Sam specifically, who's a point-to-point encryption QSA. Just a reminder that the NACS show is October 1st through the 4th in Atlanta, Georgia, and Conexxus partners with NACS to present the Tech Edge series. And Conexxus wishes to thank their 2019 annual Diamond sponsors. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Simon. And Simon, thanks so much again for sharing your knowledge today. And I know, we're going to have you go back to the basics, and certainly offers a full, robust program and networking security. But we appreciate you kind of bringing things down to some more of a basic level for some folks who may not be real familiar with the firewall and LANs and WANs. So Simon, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cara. And thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to listen to us today. I'd like to apologize up front. I've come down with a bit of a throat infection. So if you hear odd pauses during my presentation, it's because I'm muting to cough myself stupid. So, as Cara mentioned, today's presentation is not an advanced firewall presentation. If you're familiar with firewalling and how to set it up and how to set up your C-store and you're a seasoned networking veteran, this is not the webinar for you. If you're wanting to find out a bit more about what a firewall is, how it works, what a WAN and a LAN and a VPN and how a C-store and petroleum network should or could be set up, then hopefully this will give you some things to think about. I think really the topic or the main thing I'd like everyone to take away today is thinking. And I hope we can achieve that by me pointing out some things that you maybe weren't aware of, that you can think about your stores, your retail locations, how they work, what's in them, and how to protect you and your customers from the bad guys out there that are always looking for a quick buck, or sometimes looking for a very long buck that causes a lot of problems down the track. So today we're going to talk a bit about your network. And when I say network, it could mean a number of things. It could mean your store's network, or networks if you have a lot of them. It could be a wide area network, which is a network that's going from one location to another, and I'll flesh that out as we go through today. We're going to talk a bit about your customers' data, where it's going, why it's going there, again, with an idea of you to think about what you're doing with your customers' data, and where things communicate. What things you've got on your network are going to be pretty interesting for a lot of people who may not have thought about it. Now, everybody with a C-store or a petroleum retail location is probably aware of the obvious things that are on their store's network. And the number of things that are on those networks are increasing every day, from the obvious, like your payment PIN pads and your site controllers, your point-of-sale screens, and maybe even your manager's PC is something you're thinking about or aware about that's on your store network. Car washes are usually connected these days. Closed-circuit TV systems are usually connected these days. Alarm systems, temperature monitoring systems, menu boards, even coffee machines and refrigerators these days are connected, and they're connected for different reasons, but usually the reason is convenience. Having your refrigerator call the software or soft drink vendor to refill it automatically for you is a great convenience. But you need to think about all these things and where they sit on your network, why they're on your network, and how they might be interacting with the other things on your network you don't necessarily want them to interact with.
And Simon, isn't tank monitoring some of that as well? And we've certainly seen several articles in the news where tank monitoring is a highly vulnerable place for perpetrators as well. Absolutely,
tank monitoring. The previous slide, I could have filled up 10 slides with the things that are on a network. So I had to draw the line somewhere. But yeah,
that's
absolutely.
True.
Tank monitoring has been in the news, and again, just like a drinks fridge or a coffee machine, it's for convenience. Remote monitoring of your fuel tank levels, telling your suppliers when to come and refill your tanks, allowing you to budget for if you're getting any loss or anything like that is there for convenience. But like everything else, you need to consider where it's communicating and why it's communicating. And the reason that you have to think about that is because not all things on your network are necessarily built with the security in mind you might want them to be built in mind with. For example, we've got a PIN pad shown on this screen. Now, they're very, very tightly secured. Also on the screen, we have a coffee machine. If it's sitting on the same network as the pin pad, it can be a launching point for a criminal. Now, one of the things that many small store owners are thinking, well, why would a criminal want to get into my store? I'm just a small store owner. You know, they're going to focus on bigger fish than me. And one of the things that a lot of the presenters at this year's Conexxus show focused on when they were talking about security was that security by obscurity doesn't stand anymore. A lot of the bigger players are really tightening their networks up, which leaves the people that have decided they were too small to bother with exposed networks that criminals take advantage of. One of the ways they take advantage of these networks is by automatically scanning the internet and searching for things that are vulnerable. A criminal might not know who your store is or who you are before they're in your network, and they found your network by accident. So if you have a coffee machine, for example, in this slide, that is able to communicate on the internet, ostensibly to maybe notify you or a vendor when it's out of coffee and it needs to be replenished, if that's not built properly, if there's not a firewall protecting it properly, a criminal might find that and get on it and see what's around. And if it's sitting on the same network as, say, a pin pad, that allows them to sit there and try and exploit any possible weaknesses in that pin pad that they can find. It also allows them to sniff the traffic, the other communications on that network from a safe host, which might be a coffee machine and sound silly to people, but it's still got a computer in it. It's likely not a very hardened computer. So one of the key dangers that I'd really like people to think about as a result of this presentation is think about everything that's on your network. Have a look at it all and work out, does it really need to be connected? And why is it connected? And are you connecting it properly? And I'm going to talk some more about that as we go through the slides.
Simon, when you talk about the network, you're talking about the internet connection itself a lot of times. Is that correct? I mean, we kind of use network as a couple different terms. And so in that particular example, I think we're talking about if your pin pad is on or anything else is using the same internet connection as your payments, then you're definitely possibly at risk.
Exactly. Great point, Cara. And what I'm hoping to do over the next couple of slides is explain what a firewall is and what different types of networks are, and get people thinking about where the devices reside on that network and how it might be made better. So
great.
It's a brilliant segue into what is a firewall first and foremost. Everyone's heard of one. Everyone knows they need one. They might not really know what it is. And really, when it all boils down to it, it's a filter. And it controls how communications from one network flow or not to another. And as Cara said, what is a network? Well, you might have a network in your store. It might be what's called a flat network, which means everything from your pin pads to your fridges to your coffee machines to your temperature monitoring is all on the one network. It's plugged into a big switch. And in that case, the firewall will be protecting how that network communicates to the internet and how the internet communicates to that network. And what's pretty typical these days is a basic firewall will allow anything on your network to communicate anywhere it wants on the internet, but it will not allow, out of the box, for communication that's originating from the internet to come into your network. So that, in simple terms, means if you open up a web browser on your PC and you're going to a news website, that PC is allowed out to the news website, and because it initiated the communications, it's allowed to pull back the web pages and you can read your news. But it doesn't allow the news website to actually send stuff proactively into your PC. It's blocked at the firewall, in simple terms. If you have network segments, and I'm going to talk about those in a moment, if you have a separate area of your network for your payments equipment and a separate area for your back office equipment, that firewall can control how devices on those two internal networks can communicate. So a firewall is really a filter. The mistake a lot of people make is allow the firewall to not filter certain communications for convenience. One of the most common things in petroleum is allowing people remote access into your tank monitoring. And you'll do it because it's kind of how it's been done all along. Your tank monitoring service needs to get into your network. You open up a rule, or your IT person opens up a rule to allow them in. If it's not done properly, anyone else can get in and have a look at your fuel tank monitoring system, potentially get onto it, and then use it as a launching point to other things in your network. So I want everyone to think about, as we go through this, how your network is shaped and where communication is allowed and why it's allowed. And part of that is understanding what is a LAN. And a LAN stands for Local Area Network. So this is the network or networks in your retail location. So in this example, we've got what's called a flat network. All these devices can talk to each other. They're just plugged into a switch or connected to a Wi-Fi network that allows all these devices to see one another if they want to. So your pin pad, your drinks fridge, your coffee machine, your building temperature, HVAC, your point of sale, are all sitting on the same network and can ostensibly get out to the internet, but can see one another. Do they need to? The obvious answer is no. So don't let them. Does your point of sale terminal need to talk to your coffee machine? No, it doesn't. So they should not be on the same network. Does your refrigerator need to talk to your EMV pin pad? No, it doesn't. So they should not be on the same network. As a retailer, you need to segment your equipment into different zones. And I'm going to talk this through in a bit more detail for everybody as we go through. But a local area network, you'll have one, or if you've set things up well, more than one in your store. And you need to think about, when you're setting these up, what devices are on your network, what needs to communicate with what and why, and then start segmenting them off as appropriate. And we'll go through that in some more detail as we move through here. Now, everyone's also heard, probably, of a WAN. They sound really similar, and if you've got a funky accent like mine, they can be hard to differentiate, but a WAN stands for a wide area network. So you've got a local area network, which is the network in your store, and you may have a wide area network. And that really, in simplistic terms, is a network from one LAN to another at another location. So a real-world example of that in petroleum is many of you will have a VPN from your store to allow your site controller or payment processing to talk to your payment processor. And that'll be across a VPN, or a virtual private network. And that component is called a WAN. It's a wide area network. It's allowing devices to communicate with each other across a wide area. You might be on the East Coast and your payment processor's network is on the West Coast. It's a pretty wide network, but it works great. And a VPN is often used to make sure that traffic going across the internet can't be eavesdropped on by anybody else, because the internet is a shared network and you can see anything traveling across it if you know how to look. Anybody can. So what people do is they'll form a virtual private network, which really means traffic that's sent from one network to another is encrypted, usually by the firewall, while in transit. So there'll be a firewall at the edge of your store, and there'll be a firewall at the edge of the payment processor's environment. And those two firewalls encrypt the data going from one point to the other, so that anyone looking at the data in transit can't actually see what it is. It's called a virtual private network because the old-fashioned way, many years ago, was you would actually have a private network. You would pay a lot of money to a multinational carrier, typically, who has a private network just for you. Absolutely not scalable to most businesses, but many large organizations had private networks. A virtual private network makes that type of connectivity available to anyone, because forming a VPN is a pretty trivial matter these days. So it's available to anybody, and it means you can talk from one network to another in private. So why do you care? Why should you care about this? Well, there's a number of reasons why you might care. Some of them are to do with ethics, and it's protecting your customers' data is the right thing to do. But if we get right down to it, The bottom line is your bottom line. If your customers' credit card data or personally identifiable information is obtained by someone who shouldn't have it, and it goes public, it's going to cost you money. The old fear factor again, which I usually don't like talking about, but the reality is if you don't protect your customers' data from people who are trying to get it, it's going to cost you money and reputation and just be a general hassle. 60% of small businesses that suffer a credit card breach go out of business as a result of it because of the cost and the reputational damage. And if anyone reads the latest Verizon incident reports, the number of incidents involving small businesses has been increasing year over year over year, largely because bigger organizations are getting their act together and it's the low-hanging fruit piece. But also because everything these days is going on the internet, which means criminals don't physically have to be anywhere near your place of business to rob it. And whilst the internet and network connectivity brings a lot of convenience and speed and profit to businesses, there's a downside to it too, and that if you're not careful, you're opening your doors to anybody to be able to take advantage of you and your business. So really, in my opinion, that's the bottom line of why you should care. It's the right thing to do, but it's also going to cost you if you don't care eventually.
Yeah, I think, Simon, too, that you pointed out that so many small businesses are now getting attacked, and so many people think that, oh, I'm a small business, so they're not going to find me. But to your point, everybody's on the public internet, and we had a great webinar last month by the Actimera folks, just talking about the different attacks that are out there and around the networks, and people have done a really good job of putting in firewalls at their stores, but they have to remember to put in firewalls at their main offices as well. And that's where we're seeing the attacks and the ransomware. And so if you want more information on that, this is a shameless plug for the Conexxus webinars, but we've got quite a few webinars out there on some of those very topics. And so I just wanted to point that out. So thanks, Simon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karen. So what should you do to stop this? It really doesn't have to be a big hassle. Conexxus is an organization that has a lot of folks that are part of it that can help. But when it all boils down to it, there's two simple things you can do to protect yourself. One is segment your network, and I'm going to talk a bit more about what that means in the next few slides. And the second thing is build your network with consideration of the payment card industry data security standard. It's complex, it's scary, it can be really daunting when you first look at it. I don't think anyone could claim that the PCI Council are good marketers. They're absolutely not. But the standards they have and the guidelines they have are really spot on. So segmentation and build in compliance with a known standard that makes sense. And that could be the PCI standard, but it could be one of Connexxus's many standards as well. Connexxus standards tend to be more granular and really help you with specific issues. And PCI is more macro, but segment and build the way everyone else is.
Simon, is it safe to say on the PCI front, though, that really the merchant is ultimately responsible for data security? I mean, you've got, with 50% of the sites being major oil branded and 50% not being, and whether you're unbranded or part of a major retailer, I mean, at the end of the day, even if you're a single store operator, you're still responsible for your own PCI compliance, and you shouldn't rely on anybody else, even if you're major oil branded or part of a retail network. And so I think that, as you said, PCI really allows for a good basic understanding and good baseline for some basic blocking and tackling. But you're right. I mean, the first thing the PCI requirement is to install and maintain a firewall. So here we are today.
Exactly right. Thank you. And yeah, you can't contract yourself away from being responsible for being PCI compliant. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter the marketing, people are there to help and organizations are there to help, but responsibility is the name of the game. And ultimately, you are responsible for your own business and making sure that everything is set up properly and in compliance with PCI and other standards you want to adhere to.
Yep. Thanks, Simon.
Cool. So let me give you a really basic overview of how a simple C-store network might be built. And hopefully it sort of glues together the segmentation, the WANs, the LANs, the firewalling in a way that makes sense to you. So shown on this screen is a firewall. It's connected to the internet. So let's pretend this firewall is in your C-store or one of your C-stores. So it's controlling how your C-store can connect to the internet and how the internet can connect to your C-store. You need to segment your network into zones that are appropriate so they can be secured differently from one another. One of your networks is most likely going to be a payments network. This is where card data is flowing around. This network needs to be seriously secured to such an extent that other things can't actually function on it. If you have a PC sitting on this network, or you have a Coke machine sitting on this network, if this network is secured the way it should be, those devices won't work because how they're trying to communicate will be blocked by the firewall. So this is why segmentation is important, because you can secure things to the maximum available for each zone rather than for the lowest common denominator across your whole network. If you've decided to secure your network to the extent needed by your coffee machine, that's a problem. But you don't need to make everything as secure as your payments network. You're going to have a point of sale zone, and most of the point of sale vendors are changing how their systems work to make them a little more flexible for you and able to do a few more things. But the point of sale zone will still need to be secured in a manner that's appropriate for it, and in such a way that that network would be useless if you had your CCTV system plugged into it. Now we get into a back office network. Now a back office network is the network where you want to put your things that you need to do business that aren't involved with payments. So most retailers, this is the network where they'll have their manager's PC, which is allowed to communicate to the payments equipment to get logs and things out of them, but nothing else. And usually that communication, or always really, that communication is going to be over an encrypted channel, usually a secure web link from the manager's PC into the site controller. This network will often also have the CCTV systems and all the Internet of Things devices that you've got. Shown here is a coffee machine and a fridge that we keep talking about. As Kara correctly mentioned, it should probably also have an underground tank monitoring system and the HVAC and all the rest of it. And you might want to segment that down even further. But what's common these days is this back office network is going to be reasonably secure. The firewall rules on it won't allow someone to sit there and stream Netflix, but it will allow the coffee machine to talk to the coffee vendor. You might have a voice network. Many folks are flipping to voice over IP phone systems because they're super cheap compared to the old landlines. But you don't want your phone system to be on the same network as your payments, and you probably don't want your phone system on the same network as your back office equipment. There's multiple reasons for that. The things we've been focusing on today are to do with security and firewalling, but they also allow, having these things separate, allow you to tune the performance of each of these networks. You probably want your payments and loyalty traffic to be in the fast lane out to the internet and back from it. You probably want your voice network to be pretty slick and not have choppy calls. But the coffee machine and the drinks fridge, that network can be throttled so that you've got good bandwidth available for other things. So whilst the focus of this presentation is meant to be on security and segmentation and thinking about what's on your network, as you start doing things like this, it can open up options to you to really streamline your business and get really aggressive with how your network performs and how your applications and devices perform. Now, many of you are also going to have Wi-Fi, and you need to seriously think about Wi-Fi and how it works in your environment. You might have as shown here, a customer Wi-Fi network for if you have a coffee shop or something and people are going to hang around your store. You might have a guest network for them, which is completely separate from all the other networks in your environment. You might also add a Wi-Fi network to the back-office network, so you can have handheld inventory scanners, or maybe your CCTV system is using wireless cameras. In that case, you need to have that Wi-Fi network set up differently from, say, a guest or a staff Wi-Fi network. So again, segmentation is the key. Thinking about what you've got in your network is really important, and what needs to communicate to what.
And Simon, obviously the firewall and security network providers like yourself and others can help folks manage this, and also, can also help people get this set up so that they can prioritize in case there are bandwidth issues and things like that, to make sure that your payments come first before other things as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly right. And to take it a step further, some of your stores might be part of a major brand, and some of those brands dictate how this is set up for you. So some of the brands say, you're going to have a network that looks like this. You can play around with these little parts, but this is a best practice for all of our stores. And so for some brands, you're stuck with what the brand has told you to get. Others are more free with what people can do and provide guidelines. But if you're a true independent, it's completely down to you. And quite right, at that point, the firewall or a network vendor or managed service provider can really help provide guidance for you on how to set this stuff up properly. So we've looked here and we've covered a firewall, and we've covered, in this case, 5 different LANs that are all at one store. We haven't really spoken about WANs, and we need to. And I really want to focus on VPNs. We spoke a bit about VPNs before and how they encrypt traffic between one location and another. And they're really important when you're thinking about how these devices on your LANs communicate to other things that you might just be thinking are out there on the internet. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is opening up a firewall rule to allow them to access their CCTV camera system from wherever they are, on their phone or wherever. And that also, in probably 90% of the cases I've seen, allows anybody to have access to your CCTV system, which presents obvious problems if someone wants to case your location to work out when to physically break into it, or just goof with you, or use the CCTV platform as somewhere to jump onto something more profitable for them, like your point of sale environment. If your CCTV system is segmented, like shown here, if someone does break into it because you've set something up for convenience rather than security, the criminals are limited as to where they can go. They can jump to your manager's PC or your coffee machine or your fridge, which is going to be inconvenient for you, but not going to stop you being in business. So, A, segmenting things secures them because you're limiting where a bad guy can go. But B, you need to consider VPNs for building wide area networks. And I've got some places drawn up here as to where you might want to build VPNs, or where you might have them without knowing them. So your point of sale vendor uses VPNs to come into your store and support and manage your payments equipment. And the reason they do that is they don't want you to have a firewall rule open to allow them in, because it will potentially allow anyone else in too. So they have end-to-end encrypted VPNs into their support environment to securely access your payment stuff if you need them. Many businesses will also have VPNs to loyalty processors, because loyalty data being sent often contains personally identifiable information, which, whilst not credit card data, is a major problem if someone gets hold of it for you. Pretty much all credit card data is encrypted. Sometimes, if you're lucky, from your site controller all the way through to the payment processor, but more often than not, certainly with larger brands, or a lot of them, it's using a VPN to encrypt the card data into the payment processor. These two over on the right are 2 things I want people to think about. Many dealers, if you have a head office, should form a VPN from your head office into your back office network. That allows you and your IT team or support people to be able to get in securely and use your CCTV system without worrying about who else can access it. Maybe remotely manage that back office PC. Maybe interact with other devices that you have on this network, potentially underground tank monitoring, fuel tank monitoring. That data might go via a VPN to head office and then get sent from there to the vendor that's looking after it. But also a lot of third-party vendors, like in this kind of tongue-in-cheek example here of a coffee service, the traffic, the information, the way they're getting to your coffee machine, or your coffee machine is getting to them, should be over a VPN. You should be looking at this and asking your third-party vendors how they access your network, even for something as trivial as a coffee machine, because that coffee machine can be a landing point to go elsewhere. So don't just write off the humble connected coffee machine as something that's unimportant to your network. It could be a major problem if you don't consider where it's sitting and what it's communicating with and why it's communicating. So let's wrap things up for people. And as I said at the start, this is all about thinking and giving you some ideas to consider. So really think about the connected devices that you've got in your environment. Think about what each device needs to communicate with and why it needs to communicate with it. Many vendors who are not familiar with the C-store environment will have devices that are set up to work in just ridiculous ways and want to access things in your network that they just shouldn't in any way. So don't take a vendor's word that their device is secure. Have a look and a think and a read through the manual and work out where it's communicating and does it really need to. You should separate your network into logical zones. That way, you can secure each network as appropriate rather than going to the lowest common denominator. And you shouldn't allow open remote access into any of your networks. If you can avoid it, which everybody can if they put a bit of effort in, you should utilize VPNs to get into your network. The VPNs might be, as I showed on the previous slide, from one network to another, or they could be a software VPN from your phone or your tablet that secures the connection from your phone or tablet into your environment and then allows you to have a look at the CCTV system, for example. So use VPNs for all sensitive info coming in, but also going out. Ask your vendors why they're sending this data unencrypted from your environment, because unfortunately, if your name is likely to be in the news as well as the vendors. So don't take a vendor's word for things. Think about it, look at it, and consider it, and never stop thinking. So I've kind of done the thinking thing to death. Hopefully, I have got you thinking, though, and thinking about what's on your network. And next time you're in one of your stores or your head office, have a look around. Think about what's there. Do some reading about what's going on. Criminals have broken into networks through printers and all sorts of odd things. TV sets. If you have a connected or a smart TV that's sitting on the same network as your point of sale system, how secure is that smart TV? Is it a cheap Chinese TV set bought from Walmart? Do they ever update the software on it? Is it even remotely secure? Is it holding connections open somewhere that it shouldn't? Think about these things. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Simon, because it's like so many things have IP addresses and you don't even think about it. And those are the things that are vulnerable, right? And at the Conexxus annual conference, we heard Ed Adams from Security Innovation talk about one of his engineers had his refrigerator hacked, and they had hacked his refrigerator and made it into an email server, which was sending out phishing emails.
Exactly.
So yeah. It does happen, and it's really crazy what goes on out there. But this has been great information, Simon. Thank you very much for kind of taking us back to Firewalls 101 and 201 here. And folks, I just wanted to remind everybody that if you have a question, to please type your questions into the question panel that's on the GoToWebinar part of your page. And it seems complicated, but it also seems simple. And so, so a lot of folks, part of PCI 2 is the logging and the monitoring. And so a lot of folks think that hey, I'm just going to go to an electronics store and buy a firewall and I can set it up, and they might even, it's pretty easy to set up a firewall, I think, but the question is that did you set it up correctly? And are you monitoring those logs, because and that's really why, you know, you have your oil brands and major and the others that are out there, just because of the fact that you know, we really need to make sure that we're dotting all the I's and all the T's as well. So we do have a couple of questions that came in, and the first one is, how do the various point of sale provider requirements for the managed network service providers fit into store networks and firewalls?
Well, they are great in a lot of ways because they define how a firewall needs to be set up to protect the point of sale vendor's environment. So for a lot of folks, if you're using an MNSP, certified MNSP firewall provider from one of the major point of sale vendors, your firewall rules for your point of sale environment are taken care of. But they don't have anything to do with, more often than not, the payments environment, because they don't know who you're processing with, so they don't set rules for that. They don't have any rules set for the back office environment because they're not touching it. And they don't have any rules for any other networks that you've got. So if you've segmented your network into multiple zones, as you should, the point of sale vendor MNSP program is going to cover one or maybe partially two of your network segments, but not all of them. So they really help, but they're not a holy grail to fix everything.
Right, right. And to your point, I mean, the thing that the firewall, or the point of sale vendors are doing is saying, okay, you have to protect the point of sale zone, as you just pointed out, but not necessarily the rest of the things that you need to protect. And, you know, and you've talked numerous times about the numerous items in the convenience store. So next question is, to understand the basics of how we set up the network segments, is it controlled by DNS or by like a zone router?
Okay, so it's a great question. It's not really controlled by either of those things. So DNS can be used to segment things, but it's not really how it's designed to work. And a zone router that most people in the petroleum world are familiar with is really for segmenting just the payments environment or the point of sale environment from everything else. So network segmentation is usually a step forward from, should be a step forward from the zone router. Now, an MNSP firewall vendor will actually do the zone router's work as well as all the other firewalling work. So the examples I gave with a payments network, a point of sale network, a back office, and a voice network wouldn't all be handled by the zone router. And they certainly wouldn't be controlled by DNS. They'll be controlled by the store firewall that you have. So if you're part of a petroleum brand that dictates a firewall be put in, it'll be done by that. If you're a true independent that's really not doing that and is relying on the zone router, that zone router is only going to protect your point of sale network. It's not going to protect any of the others.
Yeah, yeah. And we're just, in addition to protecting payments, folks, you know, now we're seeing new things come about, like at the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA. And so now merchants to consider whether they are susceptible and fit into the CCPA model. But we also know that, according to at least my legal team, has saying that at least 12 states have introduced other personally identifiable information potential laws, meaning you have to protect people's personal information, much like the GDPR that we've seen in Europe. And so now loyalty fits into that, and so it may not be payment card data, but when you look at the payment card regulations, it also talks about protecting sensitive data. And so I think most of us would agree that personally identifiable information, or what we call PII, is sort of subject to that quote unquote sensitive data. And so therefore you need to think about what's happening, especially in your loyalty port as well. You know, they sing things over in plain text. Is it encrypted or not? Or should that be VPN'd as well? So I think that is, and you talked about loyalty in your diagram earlier, but I do think that is another higher vulnerability point there. But there are so many. So
yeah, there's also a major inconvenience factor. There's a lot of ransomware going on, which is criminals getting onto networks and encrypting a machine or a device so you can't use it without paying them some money to unencrypt it. And that's not necessarily going to put you out of business, but if someone comes and does it to a whole pile of your back office PCs, then you can't reorder supplies, you can't send emails, you typically can't do payroll and things. So there's a major headache and hassle factor as well of exposing devices that aren't necessarily critical to your business, but think about what sort of impact on your business not having certain things for a week or more might have. And you might be able to get through those things, but it's going to take your eye off the ball for all the other stuff you should be looking at.
You're exactly right, Simon. And we've seen so many of those smaller offices, offices that might have 50 or 100 locations, like a branded wholesaler or a marketer with like 50 to 100 or even 200 dealers. And while they've done a great job of securing the stores, they forgot to secure their own office, and that's exactly what's happening. And we're seeing it with small businesses. And if you don't, and so if you have a firewall provider or two that you're using at your locations, contact that same firewall provider and have them set up and protect your main office as well, because we're seeing so much of that happening. And to your point, it's an inconvenience, and if you've lost a week's worth of business, I mean, do you really want to pay 3 Bitcoins to get your stuff back? And you also have payroll information that they could, again, personally identifiable information that they might release on the dark web. And then, of course, then you've got a whole other issue there. So it just goes on and on. So at the end of the day, the good news is you've got folks like yourself to help people with that and navigate through all of that and secure everything. So we do have another question, that is, what is a quote-unquote monitored firewall?
Well, that's a big question because it could mean any number of things. Basically, a monitored firewall means either some form of artificial intelligence or an actual person with intelligence is looking at the logs and the information coming out of that firewall and how it's behaving and interpreting it, and in some cases generating an alert so you're aware of some odd behavior, or in other cases automatically taking action to remediate the possible threat and fixing it for you. And what a monitored firewall is really changing almost month by month at the moment, as organizations, firewall and security vendors are able to take advantage of new technology, particularly artificial intelligence and things reacting automatically, which allows that sort of technology to scale to smaller businesses and be more affordable to big businesses who are deploying it at scale. Because in the old days, a monitored firewall really meant having a SOC, which is a security operations center, which is a bunch of highly paid people sitting in front of screens, getting alerts coming in from firewalls and taking action on those alerts, which sounds great and looks good in movies and all the rest of it, but costs a lot of money because those people aren't free. And ultimately, the end user customer is paying for it. So these days, for most C-store and Petro stuff, monitoring is automated, and then extreme exceptions will be pushed to a human being to interact with.
Great. Well, it looks like that wraps up our questions for the day, and so just wanted to encourage everybody to go to Conexxus.org. That's where you can find links to the previous Conexxus webinars. And Conexxus is we've really tried to do a lot of information on data security this year in our webinars. And so, we started out with like the really techie stuff, and then some more from the main office networking and down to the basics today that Simon has shared. So so please feel free, and they're available upon demand. The other webinars are. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please email info@Conexxus.org. You can see our LinkedIn profile, which is Conexxus.org, or you can follow us on Twitter at Conexxus Online. And so, Simon, thank you so much for your for all of your knowledge and sharing today. And we sure appreciate the time that you spent with us and great information. So everybody have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day and great week. Thanks for your time.